Hi, I'm Keap, and on the Conquer the Chaos podcast, I talk with inspiring business owners about what it takes to build a great business and a great life. That means more money, more time, more control, more impact, more freedom. So keep listening to hear the tough lessons they learned so you don't have to repeat them.
Jenna Kutcher is an amazing person that's got an amazing following. She is a New York Times bestseller for her book, How Are You Really? She's got the #1 business marketing podcast out there, Gold Digger. She's an expert in personal branding and social media influence. She is an expert in so many different areas, but she also understands the importance of getting education on things. She recently decided that she had a goal. She wanted to make the perfect loaf of sourdough bread. And so she took a community education course in that and has been learning how to make. So she's at home now in Minnesota, not right now, but currently, while she's trying to perfect her sourdough bread, and while her husband is leading the charge in beekeeping. So if you ever want to drop in at the house up there, they've got sourdough bread warm coming out of the oven with fresh honey from their own beehives that they'll be happy to share with you. She's just not going to tell you where they live, so good luck trying to find her. We're going to welcome her to the stage for a fireside chat with Keap. Will you please welcome to the stage one of our favorites, Jenna Kutcher?
Going to be extra careful up here.
That's right.
I am clumsy, so I would fall.
All right. Great to have you here. This is fantastic. How many of you are following Jenna Kutcher? Raise your hand if that's the case. All right.
Yes, I see Rory and women.
So if you're not, Jenna is a brilliant marketer, and there's so much you can learn from her and what she does with social media. In fact, Robert was just talking to you about. I heard him commending you for your amazing social marketing. Take just a second and share with the audience what you believe is the very essence of what makes your brand so amazing. What is it that has enabled you to build such an incredible podcast, get such an incredible book out there? What is that essence that connects so much with people?
I think my big mission is to help people treat time as their currency. And I feel like so many entrepreneurs start businesses to have freedom and this expansive life. But I feel like when we really get into it, we get so caught up in all of the things that are pulling at our attention. So I think at the heart of it, it is to build businesses that don't take over our lives, but that fuel and feed into the lives that we want.
I love that. Does that resonate with people or what? That freedom message, right? That freedom and time. Time is a currency. Obviously, I feel very strongly about that. That's right at the core of Conquer the Chaos. Why is it that we get so wrapped up and we lose that picture of freedom and time when we get into business? What have you seen?
Oh, well, I started my career as a wedding photographer. So I worked for corporate, bought a camera on Craigslist, and taught myself how to be a wedding photographer to get out of corporate. And I recognize that a lot of times when we start businesses, the one thing that we love doing, that's what we imagine. I imagine myself with my camera in hand taking photos all day. And the actual art of photography was 2% of what was required of me to run the business, right? There's marketing, invoicing, I was customer service, I was handling, editing, everything like that. And so I think what can be really hard is the ultimate dream is to do what you love and get paid to do what you love. But the percentage of doing what you love when you're running a profitable company is so low that it can really lead to burnout. It can lead to dissatisfaction. And I think too, a lot of times we look at entrepreneurs who are showing up everywhere and we're like, okay, I need to do Instagram, Pinterest, I need to be on LinkedIn, I need to do Facebook, I need to have a podcast, I need to do all these things well, but we miss the parts of the chapters where they were maybe doubling down and figuring that thing out before they moved on to the next. So I think it's just we're spreading ourselves too thin.
Yeah, so true. And like you said, there's so many parts of the business that start to stack up on us.
Yeah.
And we didn't account for all of that. And pretty soon there's, as I say all the time, there aren't enough hours in the day. There's just too much to do. And so you have to start to get good at which things are we doing, which things do we say, oh, we don't need to do that. What are some of the things that you teach your students, that you share with entrepreneurs that help in really treating time as currency and doing the right things and letting some of the not so necessary things go by the wayside?
Yeah. So I will never forget the day that I hit six figures. It had felt like this very elusive goal. My mom was a teacher. My dad works in a paper mill. I'm a first generation entrepreneur. And that six-figure number, I will never forget that day. I saw it, like my revenue hit that. I went up and took a shower. I was using the same herbal essence I had used the day before. The angels were not singing. Nothing had changed in my life. And I remember thinking, man, I thought this would feel so different. Mm-hmm. And what was so hard about that day, and I think a lot of us have had this happen in our lives, where we set these really big goals and we achieve them, and we realize like maybe that wasn't the goal after all. Like maybe I was chasing the wrong thing. And so that day I sat down, we were living in this tiny village in Wisconsin, and I sat down with my husband, and I'd run all these numbers, and he comes home from his job selling wine in grocery stores, and I have all these spreadsheets out, and I'm like, I have to tell you something. And instead of celebrating the six figures, I said, I can't do this anymore. Like, if this is what it takes to earn six figures, I'm done. I was so much happier when I was earning $50,000 a year. I had weekends, I had time with my family, and so I said, I want to go back to that. And what was so interesting is that the next year I booked half the amount of weddings. I set out to make half the amount of money because I really was learning that time was my currency. And when I finally unlocked time in my life, I learned the tactics, tools, and strategies that ended up allowing me to scale to seven figures in a much more peaceful pursuit.
So you tried to cut back half.
Yes.
And you made 10 times more.
Yes. And what's crazy about that is it wasn't even about the money. It was that when I finally unlocked time and got off that treadmill that felt like it was never going to end, I was able to ask myself, like, what am I curious about? What do I want to learn? How do I want to grow? What do I want to try? What do I want to experiment with? And so to go back to your question, Clay, the thing that I want you guys to hear is that if you prioritize your time, you will likely make more money, because so many people are just constantly hitting the same wall day in and day out, and you're not actually looking up into this beautiful world that we're living in and seeing potential and possibility. And so every time my career trajectory took off, it was when I had really gotten laser focused at where is my time best spent right now? What do I want to learn, whether it's making sourdough bread or learning how to be a beekeeper or trying to convince my husband to get chickens, whatever that is. But when I finally prioritize time, I feel like my life falls into place. And so it's like stepping off of that treadmill. And so I would just say that if you are someone who you're like, I want to scale, or I want to change, or I want to pivot, what you have to do is you have to establish what is your enough point. Meaning, what is the bare minimum that you need to make to feel safe and secure? Because I believe it's impossible to unlock creativity without safety and security. But when you know that point, you stop booking the work, you stop taking the clients, and you prioritize your time. And so that has just been like the key to my success. Whenever there's something I want to do, I figure out, how do I get back my time? Because my time is my life.
I love that. How many of you can identify with that, of not treating your time as... Thank you. Yes, right? I mean, that's it. Mm-hmm. That's what we do as entrepreneurs. And we talk all the time about stop trading hours for dollars. Yeah. You know, when we're doing that, we get stuck in this on the treadmill, and it leads to a lot of burnout, a lot of frustration. And you know, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to an entrepreneur who hits seven figures and then eight figures. And it's not all it was cracked up to be, and they're like, whoa.
Yeah.
And sometimes they were making more money and had personally take home, and had more time when they were smaller, and then they sort of romanticized the idea of just go back to that.
Yes.
And yet there are ways, as you've touched on here, to actually change it so you're prioritizing the time, and you can actually have more by bringing that focus down in your time. What are some of those things that you've done? You know, you talked about, I learned some tools, some tricks, some of the strategies for how to do this. What are some things that people can do? Because I know, we know people in the audience dealing with that, and some that didn't raise their hand or clap are like, too frustrated to do that right
Yeah.
now. So share some of those. What are some of those things?
Well, I am crazy about Pinterest. And I know a lot of the men already just turned their brains off when I said that word, but come back to me. Pinterest is a search engine. It's not social media. It's not just pretty pictures. It's not just collages. Pinterest is a search engine. And so we get over 25,000 site visits per month organically without paying for ads from Pinterest using a strategy that takes 1 hour a week. So the average marketer is spending between 16 and 20 hours a week on marketing. What if 1 hour a week went to Pinterest? Now here's where you need to listen. I made a reel this morning for my Instagram feed. I'm the only person, I don't have a content team. I am the person responding to DMs and creating content. That damn reel took me at least an hour to create, right? That reel is gonna live and die within 3 to 5 hours, 24 hours if I'm lucky. One pin on Pinterest lasts 4 months. So when you think about your content lifespan and how much time you're spending on creating content that is literally living and dying before anyone gets a chance to consume it, it is crazy that that is where our precious non-renewable time is going into. So I love Pinterest. It's an amazing way to grow your email list because you can post all of your freebies. And what's amazing is that with Pinterest, you could take one piece of content and create as many pins as you wanted pointing to that one piece of content. So if you have one opt-in that you're running to grow your email list, you could create 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 pins that could all point to that one opt-in, and each singular pin has the average lifespan of 4 months. I still have blog posts and opt-ins from years ago generating leads right now as we speak without me doing anything. So I love Pinterest. I think it's such an underutilized resource. If you are questioning if your content or your business would do well on there, after this talk, go on Pinterest and just type in a few keywords, and you will be shocked that there are already people in your industry finding success on Pinterest. So that is one of the strategies. And for me, when I became a mom, my time evaporated. And so I don't necessarily have hours to spend creating reels every single day. And so Pinterest was the way that I took a maternity leave because I knew that my content was still working for me while I was on maternity leave. Another thing that I think is so important is long form content. I just feel like so many of us are wells of knowledge and so many people ask the same questions over and over and over again. And so whether you have a podcast, a YouTube channel, or a blog, I've blogged since day one of my company. It's beautiful to build out a library of resources that you can easily point people to and to send people to a place that you own on the internet that you can control their experience on. I just fear that so many of us are building our businesses in borrowed spaces. We are literally renting space from people like Mark Zuckerberg, which he's a genius, but that's not where I want my rent to be paid. And so I think that it's really important that we look at how do we own our content and how are we leveraging strategies so that the work that we're working so hard on is actually getting seen, consumed, and giving us a direct result.
There was so much good stuff.
Sorry, that was a lot. I have a whole course about that, so sorry.
That was awesome. And she does have great courses about this. So let me just hit on a couple of things that you said. So one principle that I'm hearing you call out is leveraging your time by investing it in areas where it lives on.
Yes.
Instead of doing something with a reel where it's gone in a couple days, you've got on Pinterest, it can live on for months and months and months. Second principle I'm hearing you call out really clearly is own your content, your content receptacles, for lack of a better term. So a blog, your email list. You kind of subtly hit on building your email list so that you own the email list instead of only having your social followers where you're really renting it there versus owning it in email and being able to drive people from Pinterest to email or to blogs. So I heard email and blogs as a way to own your content as opposed to renting on social media properties.
Yeah. I would just say, I have one of the top marketing podcasts in the country, and a lot of times people will say, what is the simplest way to describe marketing? And I feel like every entrepreneur should have 2 focuses. And I think that part of the reason why we're so burnt out is that we have 20, right? And to me, the 2 focuses are 1, growing your email list, And to every other activity that you're doing in your business, the number one goal should be to use that activity to grow your list. So if you are prioritizing Instagram, the goal of Instagram is not to get likes and comments. The goal on Instagram is to get people off of Instagram and onto your list. If you have a podcast, same thing. And so I think that we've gotten so muddled at looking at things like engagement, which feels really shiny. Mm-hmm. But when we look at the sharks, they're not asking you how many likes you get on a post. They're asking you, like, what is the return on that platform? And I think a lot of us get so caught up in like, well, this performs well. Well, performance is great, but like, I want cash in the bank or I want time back in my life. And so that's what I'm looking at.
I love that you just shared that, because you and I have many friends who are so famous on social media and it hasn't translated into the financial success that they expected. And there's a hollow satisfaction in all those likes and all those follows and all of that Insta fame, but it's not actually turning into what they thought it would be. And I think that one strategy that she just shared of turning it from social platforms into email addresses, where you can own that and then build it. That one thing is what so many people overlook, and especially younger entrepreneurs, and They get caught up in it, and I see it over and over. It's like, your list is your gold. That's it. Like when you have the list, you can do all kinds of incredible things. So I'm really glad that you called that out. Let me ask you this. You mentioned, amidst all of those nuggets that you were dropping, one of the things you said was get clear on what you will work for and how you will invest your time and treat it that way. I don't know if you've read Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, good friend. I don't know if you know Dan, but he does a really great job in that book of spelling out how you determine what things you should be investing your time in based on what you decide is the income that you want to have. And so if you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. Buy Back Your Time is a concept that's, in fact, Dan came and had some of his students come do a mastermind session at our office a few months back, and I was just getting the book out, and I hadn't read his book. And afterward, I read his book, and I texted him, and I said, dude, this is like the exact complement to what I teach in my book around automation. And so I highly recommend it. It's really good. And you touched on one of the principles there of know what it is you're willing to invest your time for, from a dollar standpoint. I want to have you take a minute more on that, because I think you are world class at knowing when and where to invest your time and then putting boundaries in place. It seems like there's two sides of it. One is knowing what's it worth to go and do that, and then the other side is like, okay, and therefore, I'm not going to do these things or at these times. Share a little bit of some of the practical tips around how you've done that.
Yeah. So one of the things, I became a mom 6 years ago after a couple years struggle. And so when I was in those years of waiting, I promised myself that I wasn't going to waste that waiting season, that I really wanted to work in the waiting so that I could be the type of mom I wanted to be when the babies finally came. And one thing that I think was really interesting, even with the Shark Tank, is I have not created a new offer besides writing my book in the last 6 years. So since I became a mom, my business has been rinse and repeat for 6 years. And it's growing, right? It's only growing. And I think what's really fascinating, and I am a visionary, I am multi-passionate, I have pivoted a million times, and yet I recognize that the rinse and the repeat is the gift and not the burden. Because I think a lot of times as creatives, it can feel constraining. But what is so beautiful is that I can run a multi-million-dollar company, and I can put my daughter down for her nap, and I can be there, and I do a 4-day work week, and I hire moms, and it's just this beautiful thing. And so what's been really interesting to me is that if the idea of a rinse and repeat business sounds boring to you, how do you make it fun again? Like, how do you gamify it? And so like for this year, it was like looking into data and optimizing and some of those like boring things that are so awesome when you like change a headline and your conversion goes up by like 0.2 and you're like, yes, this is it. And so it's like, how do you add that excitement back in? And so for me, it's like go deep, not wide. And the deeper I go, the greater I get to serve people, but also like the greater my life gets. Like I don't want to be rich in my bank account and bankrupt in life. And trust me, I've met so many people in that place.
Yep.
And I have been fortunate to sit in rooms of incredibly successful people. And no matter what happens, every time I go home, I'm like, I might have the smallest business there, but I am the most at peace person in the room. And that's all I want, you know? And so thank you. And so I just think that like the rinse and the repeat is like so many of you are sitting on gold mines that you gave up on. And so how do you look at what your offers are, what you've already created that is so good, and how do you commit to getting it to the people you created it for? Because I know it's fun and flashy to always be creating something new, and I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, actually Dan talks about this in his book, that entrepreneurs crave chaos. A lot of times we've come from chaotic backgrounds and there's some sort of peace in the chaos. And I would say push on that until it's so uncomfortable that you're sitting still with yourself. And so I would say that's like the biggest thing. And I told Clay yesterday, I was like, in a year where a lot of people's businesses are struggling to perform, our courses are up 30% this year. And it's the same courses I've been teaching for 6 years. So if you're sitting in this room right now, can you imagine doing the same thing for the next 6 years and just getting better every single time you do it? Because that's what I think a real entrepreneur can commit to. And I think that that's sometimes required.
Amazing. Amazing. We all know that as entrepreneurs, we have, shiny object syndrome. And I hope you have heard very clearly from two incredibly talented, creative entrepreneurs on stage today. Sabri, as well as Jenna, are both incredible creators. And I don't know if you heard Sabri say this, but he said, one of the ways that I satiate that desire, that natural tendency I have, is to just tweak my offers and go create things, but instead of creating what's behind it.
Yep.
And you've heard Jenna say the same thing. And we know that we have a tendency as entrepreneurs to go do something different instead of, like, it's acres of diamonds. It's right there. It's just focusing on improving and refining and making it better and better. And I love the way that you articulated that and what you've practiced for 6 years, just refining it and making it better and better. Incredible. Awesome stuff. Okay, a couple of other things that yesterday we were talking, and we know that a lot of times, and this kind of came up in the Shark Tank as well, that we'll grow the business and the top line's growing, but the operations are getting messy, and stop me if you haven't heard this story before. The profit or the take-home pay is the same at 500,000 as it was at 100,000, right? You start to bump into these profitability scale problems. Revenue's going, and everybody thinks that's great, and the business owner's kind of like, yeah, but. Mm-hmm. So, what have you seen in terms of the tips and tricks? What are some of the operational efficiencies? Because you've talked about time efficiencies on sort of how do you invest in it? But there's also so much of the back office, and we were talking yesterday about how it can get really messy when you look inside some of the entrepreneurs' businesses. What if, by the way, I didn't know this until yesterday. I kind of feel bad about this. I've known that Jenna obviously is a longtime Keap customer, but I didn't know about the person that you have that's leading it and driving it, who is such an efficiency maven. You told me she was really good, but when we talked yesterday, you talked about some of the things that she's done. Yeah. I'd love to, if you could just maybe share a little bit about what you and she have done in your business, or what you see others could be doing, where getting their systems, their automation, their operations in a better place can improve their business.
Yeah. Our business model is working from a place of rest and not stress. And so whenever we step into other people's businesses, my team is like, hell no, I will never work for anyone else. Because to me, as entrepreneurs, our job should be to anticipate. And most of the time, you should be able to properly anticipate exactly what you're going to need to get your offer out into the world, how you're going to deliver it. And I think that, again, looking at the rinse and repeat model of a business, it allows you to be so good at anticipating that there are no wildfires to put out. We do a 4-day work week. We do not use our cell phones for business. So I will never get a text from a team member unless it's an emergency. My phone is to connect with my family and my friends. And so we've set up these really beautiful boundaries of like, when you're working, and when you're in your life, you're in your life. And I never want to be the person that pulls you out of a moment with your child or with your spouse or with your partner or your family. And so in order to build that, we've had to get really good at SOPs, right? And so it's like, we are building things weeks or months in advance. That is just how we work. Like today, I was already planning out January content because we are done for the rest of the year. It is locked, loaded. Every email has been tested. Inside of Keap, everything has been built. So we are constantly anticipating and working ahead. And if you don't have a business where you can do that, you need to figure out how you can start building one, because that is how I sleep well at night, right? Like I used to go to bed and my brain would be racing, and I'm like, once I had kids, I'm like, I need sleep, like actual sleep. And so you have to figure that out. The other thing that I would say is like, so many of us are unorganized. Does anyone else here have ADHD? Because that's me. I was like so embarrassed at my hotel room because I look like a bachelor when I'm not with my husband. And I have had to learn how to like be so organized in how I'm storing things in the company, because how many of us spend 20 minutes looking for a Google Doc? We can't remember what we titled it. We don't know where it is. Right. It is the worst, right? And you're like, can somebody find the damn doc? And so I have had to learn how to create basically like a whole depository for my company. We use a program called Monday. There's Asana, there's Basecamp, there's all of those different ones. But that is like the home and the hub of everything. And so what's interesting to me is that like we just, with the rinse and repeat, whether I'm launching a course about Pinterest or podcasting or email list building or whatever, it's the same process every single time. We need the same web pages built. We need the same landing pages. We need the email sequence. And so we should be able to anticipate months in advance. And so I feel like burnout comes from when you are working last minute, you get that adrenaline rush and then that crash, and then you're like, I never want to do that again. So how do you create? And Dan is so good at this. I mean, literally in that book, I've bought that book for my team. It's such a great book. But every single area of my business has a process, and that process is how we run it. And so it's so efficient, and it like saves us so much time.
Yeah. Oh, so good there that you're calling out the SOPs that are not the very exciting work that entrepreneurs, it doesn't.
Here's what's crazy though, is like as somebody with ADHD and someone who is so creative and passionate, there was a time in my life where like even having meetings on my calendar felt too constraining. Like I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna wanna do on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. I can't commit to a meeting. And now in my life, I've recognized that like SOPs and boundaries and plans allow me to fully experience my life, right? It allows me to unlock the freedom that I craved in the first place. Whereas before, plans felt like they were like trapping me in, and having those specific SOPs just felt like constraining the creative in me. And now I'm like, no, those things unlock the creativity because I have time to experiment and time to like actually stay in the driver's seat.
Okay, so what made that switch?
Kids. Chasing children. I mean, I can't just like be on following my whims anymore, you know? Babies need me.
Yes.
Yeah, so that I think kids were because I want to be creative with my children now, right? Like that is the real creativity. Like I want to be playing on the floor with them and not thinking about the email I didn't get to. And so it's like my creativity shifted from this business where I was creating all these new offers to like, how can I like be the best bear to scare my 5-year-old in the bunk beds? Like that's where it shifted for me.
Okay, I love this because I'm sure, I want to unpack it a little bit, because I'm sure that when Jenna's talking about the calendar and the meetings or the SOPs or whatever the processes are, those things can seem constraining. They can feel constraining, especially the more creative the entrepreneur is, the more that feels constraining. But you made a shift there, and for you, it was your kids, which is amazing. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. And you said something as you were saying that, though, that it enabled you to experience the beauty and the things you really wanted. And I think that actually is sometimes the problem. We don't slow down enough and this is what I talk about in Conquer the Chaos, we don't actually create the vision for life and a rhythm of how we will execute that vision.
Yeah.
And so the business just crowds everything out. And we all know that if we let it, the business will consume everything. It will take all the time. There aren't enough hours in the day, so there's always more to do. And if we're not clear from a life vision standpoint of what matters the most, what do we care about, what is really beautiful in life aside from the business, then the business just takes over. And we love our business. You love your business, I'm sure. We love our business as entrepreneurs. But I think if you can take this principle of, well, if you're feeling constrained, if you're feeling like your entrepreneurial juices are just not being able to get out there because you have too many meetings and you have too many processes and systems work that you have to do. Well, actually, it's just a matter of getting clear on what would those things free you up to do. Yeah. Then you start saying no to those things, even though it may not be in that moment what feels the most urgent, but you've got to say no to some of those things to experience the beauty. Then you start to put more of that beauty into place. And it sounds like for you, kids and family pulled you to, this is what's beautiful, therefore I want to have these constraints in place that make that possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially for women, are there any other women who are like firstborn daughter energy or like people pleaser energy or taking care of everybody else energy? That's us. Welcome. For me, I used to see boundaries as this negative thing, right? Like boundaries are going to keep people and things and opportunities out of my life. And I think that so many of us, we've seen all of those Hallmark movies of like, you bump into the guy at the coffee shop and all of a sudden you're married and with kids, and we write these stories in our head. And I've recognized that boundaries don't keep things out of my life. Boundaries keep me in my life. Mm-hmm. And that has been so powerful for me because with every no that I've said, some more beautiful yes came out of it. And this year I've kind of been on like a little joy journey of like, what brings me joy outside of work and motherhood? Because for the last 6 years, I've been consumed in that. And that was when I started making sourdough bread and we became beekeepers and I joined the local rowing club and I started a garden. I had all these hobbies outside of work. And I remember talking to one of my dear friends who and I said, do you have friendships outside of the industry? Like who are your people? Like who is your community? Do you have hobbies? Do you have purpose outside of the work? We started volunteering at the local soup kitchen, like just being like deeply integrative into like the richness of life. And I just feel like for so many of us, that's the space that we're lacking, right? Like we might be able to walk into a room like this and talk about our success, but like at the end of our lives, like our headstones are not going to read like she made this much in revenue. Like that's not it. And so for me, boundaries have just unlocked the ability to be creative and curious in life. And I feel so rich, which is so beautiful. And so I would just say too, one of the team members was just talking about like, oh, I'm going to email you. And I was like, girl, read my autoresponder because it says I suck at email. You probably won't hear back from me. We work a 4-day work week, so we're not on Friday. And it was just like, it sets the stage and the precedent of like, here are my values, and I'm not just going to tell you them. You're going to see them.
In all seriousness, you should send an email just so you can see.
My team's going to be like, what happened?
And use it. It is amazing. If you want to see how to set boundaries in a very clear, concrete way, by the way, with grace and personality, and you do it so well. The first time I emailed it, I was like, that is amazing. It really is. Please do it.
Kids. I mean, and I think too, it's just like I feel like especially for women, and that's who I mostly speak to, but I feel like when I enforce my boundaries, it unlocks permission for other women to do the same because you see that you can do it in a gentle and kind way. And when I turn down opportunities, I very clearly state, like, this is not a reflection on you or the opportunity. It's just a reflection on me and my values. And I feel like, again, it just kind of gives more women the permission.
Love it. It's fantastic. You said, there were so many things in there I'd like to comment, but one of the things you said a little bit earlier was the point about when first, your line that boundaries don't keep things out, they keep me in your life, right? And the other thing that you said, though, was something that I learned from my coach many years ago, and I don't know about you, but sometimes I have to learn things again and again and again. So I've learned this many times. He brought it to my attention the first time how powerful this is, that when we say yes to something, we're saying no to someone that oftentimes we really love. And this is a hard one. This is a hard one. I will tell you, I have emotion around this because I've made this mistake many times because we get so in the rush of entrepreneurship. It's so fun. There's so many great things about it. My wife calls it "za," because we get so excited about different things, and we say yes, and we're saying no to someone that we love, someone that we care about. And sometimes it's a team member, and so I had to get really clear at one point about, okay, here's my pecking order, and it was my God and my family and my team, and kind of going through it. And there were a lot of people that wanted time that I was saying no to one of those other things. And so I really appreciate you calling out the point of we're saying no to something else when we say yes. And a lot of times we say yes with very unclear maybes. And if we can get more clear on the no's are actually really kind. The next best thing to a no to a yes is a clear no. And if we can just do that clearly, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I think as entrepreneurs we get sucked into it a little bit, and unwittingly we've said yes to all these things that are crowding out other areas in our life.
Yeah, love that.
We've got just a couple minutes left here, and I definitely want you to give people your ways to follow you, learn more about you, and practice some of these boundary setting things in your life. Very much the message you're sharing is at the heart of the book, Conquer the Chaos. And like Dan says, entrepreneurs can be addicted to chaos. And if we don't practice the three personal keys of mindset, vision, rhythm, and the three business keys of strategy, automation, and leadership, we find ourselves caught in the chaos. As we kind of wrap up here, when you reflect on the accomplishment that you've been able to make in terms of balance, I'm not talking about the revenue right now. I'm not talking about the amazing followings you have on socials. I'm talking about the balance. And when you think about that journey you've been on, what would you leave as kind of the highlights of the techniques, successful things you've done? We've talked about a lot of things, but if you could just kind of emphasize key things as people are trying to strike this balance, what would you share?
I would say look at what you've already built and how can you go deeper on it and not wider. How can you make it fun again? Because you've already built amazing things. And so how can you make that feel shiny? Setting a culture within your company, whether you have one employee or a virtual VA or 20 people working for you or 100, is what is the culture that helps people have lives outside of their work? And how do you honor and celebrate that? We have like so many fun little Slack channels of like recipes we're making, or we have one called Grandma Habits because we like to like knit and quilt and do random things on my team. And how do you celebrate the wholeness of the person that you are working with? And I would say to not get too far away from your work or the people that you're serving. I joke that like I am the person making the reels and answering the DMs, but I think that part of that is like staying so connected to the humans that care enough to follow, right? Like I think a lot of times we over strategize areas that we miss that connection, and I believe that like that connection is the gift. And so if you feel like you've gotten far away from your customer or your client or even your follower, like how do you get back in those trenches and just connect? Because, we talked about this yesterday where a lot of times you grow your company because you're relatable. You've been through something and you overcame it, and your customer sees that and now they want to do the same. And I think that in those early stages, we're so connected, right? Like we're so fresh on what that pain point is that we're solving. But if you continue to just build and scale and build and scale and build and scale, you can forget like what you're actually helping people do. Like I don't just help people market on Pinterest. I help people who create amazing things be seen. And so it's like, what is that way to stay connected to your mission, to stay connected to your customer, and to stay connected to the products that you've already built that are already amazing? And how do you get them to the people you created them for?
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking time to inspire the audience here, for doing this as a Conquer the Chaos podcast episode that will get out to people. Thank you so much for investing here and being able to share some of the things that you've learned to create an amazing balance in your life. And where can people learn more about you so that they can go a little deeper on what you teach?
Oh, yeah. The Goal Digger podcast, it's GOAL. My husband is a stay-at-home dad. He ain't no gold guy. So Goal Digger podcast is anywhere podcasts are. And then Jenna Kutcher, like Ashton, on all the platforms. And I would personally love to connect with each of you. So if anyone sends a DM, it will personally be me reading it at the airport. And so just thank you so much, and thank you for your time. And yeah, I hope that this touched you in some way.
Awesome. Let's give it up for Jenna. Thank you. Amazing. Thanks so much for listening. Subscribe right here on YouTube or in your favorite podcast app to make sure that you don't miss a single episode of the Conquer the Chaos podcast. And hey, if you like this episode, let's get this out to more entrepreneurs. We all know that it is not easy to grow a great business and a great life. And so let's get this message out to others. Make sure that you hit the like button, that you comment, and that you share it with others so that we can help other entrepreneurs build a great business and a great life as they conquer the chaos. Keep going, keep serving, and keep growing.